Welcome into Falcons Today by Chat Sports. Matthew Peterson here, following the NFL trade deadline with a very juicy rumor and story about a player that Terry Fontenot almost pulled the trigger on to trade down to Atlanta. So we're going to break that all down and then talk about the latest on Drake London. But Montez Sweat, that's the mystery man here. He was traded from the Washington Commanders to the Chicago Bears, but it sounds like the Falcons nearly got Montez Sweat down to Atlanta where he wanted to go. So I wanted to talk about this during yesterday's show, but then Arthur Smith had to go up there and say that Taylor Heinicke is the new starting quarterback, but just for this week because he thinks it's fantasy football and you can just change the quarterback based on the lineup, and we had to push this video back by a day. But here's what Jeremy Fowler wrote about after the trade deadline. Atlanta had its sights set on Sweat, but Washington went with Chicago's offer. That left the Falcons without much needed pass rush help. And my understanding is Atlanta was willing to extend Sweat's contract as part of the deal, and that Sweat wanted to go to Atlanta where he has family. All of that fell through, coming out of this with former Eagle Kentavius Street for a late-round pick swap is anticlimactic. This one stinks. I mean, Montez Sweat would have been a huge lift to this defense, especially after losing Grady Jarrett to the rest of the year with an ACL injury. So the fact that Atlanta was in on Montez Sweat, we heard before the NFL trade deadline, they were willing to offer a third-round pick for him. Ultimately, Chicago came in with a better offer, so no harm, no beef with Washington for taking a second-rounder over a third-rounder for Montez Sweat. But I've heard from people in D.C. that the Commanders like Montez Sweat a lot more than Chase Young. So even though Chase Young's got that second overall attraction to his name and NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year, Commanders front office and coach members were much more upset about losing Sweat than Chase Young. So the fact that he almost was an Atlanta Falcon and the Bears swooped in with a second rounder stings for sure. But here's maybe the silver-ish lining or a look ahead. He's going to be the Falcons' number one free agent target. Now, I know what you're thinking. Petey, the Bears sitting at 2-6 surely would not trade a second rounder for a player and then just use him as a one-year rental and let him walk after the season is over. Surely they will have an extension soon. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if you've been keeping up with the Bears lately. They have one of the better young cornerbacks. They're A.J. Terrell, if you will, and a guy named Jalen Johnson, who they let go seek a trade, ultimately did not deal him, but they are miles apart on a contract extension, so that might be bigger on their priority list. But actually it's not, because they decided, before we talk about Jalen Johnson and Montez Sweat, we have got to extend our 28-year-old defensive tackle, Andrew Billings. So I don't know if Montez Sweat is at the top of their priority list. I think the Bears might have just panicked a little bit, right? They're like, well, we'll figure it out later, but let's just get Montez Sweat, and then we'll try and get a contract extension done. But if they are unable to, I think he could be Atlanta's number one guy come March. Now, Montez Sweat is off to a really good start this season, 6.5 sacks, and I crunched the numbers for you guys. Here are his prorated stats. If you take Montez Sweat's numbers so far and prorate them for the rest of the 2023 season, he's going to finish with roughly 14 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 21 tackles for loss, and 68 tackles. Now, that's going to be difficult to keep up that kind of pace, but he is clearly on pace to be a no-doubt number one edge rusher, which I think once he kind of gets out of the traffic of the Washington defensive line with 4 first-round picks on it, he might get a little bit more of a spotlight on him and garnish some more attention and really, break out as a team's number one edge rusher without question. So now my question for you guys is, should the Falcons have offered a second-round pick for Montez Sweat? Would that have been a bit of an overpay? Was Terry Fontenot smart to go, listen, if the Bears want to offer you a second, the buck stops here for us. Like, we just can't go past a third-rounder. Or do you wish, you know what, I kind of wish the Falcons went and offered up a second-rounder for Montez Sweat, knowing that this edge rusher class, it's still early, it's only November 2nd, isn't stacking up to be one of the best edge rushing draft classes. And so if you can't find one in the draft, well, then naturally you think free agency. So with that being said, let's look at free agency for edge rushers in 2024, excluding Montez Sweat because I like to think the Bears will find an extension for him, but you never quite know. Here are the other edge rushers in free agency this upcoming March. Danielle Hunter, Josh Allen, the other Josh Allen, Brian Burns, Chase Young, Josh Uche, and then you've got Leonard Floyd, Leonard Williams, Marcus Davenport, Derek Barnett, Darrell Taylor. So there are some pretty good edge rushers that are going to hit the open market in March unless they reach an extension with their current team beforehand. This is my fear, though, that I want to share with you guys. The Falcons' pass rush is comprised mostly of vets on one-year deals, right? They don't have a lot of guys in the farm system. You know what I mean? They don't have a lot of young talent that's growing and ready to take over from a Calais Campbell or a Bud Dupree. They've got Arnold Ebiketie, who gives us some good times and highlights every once in a while. They drafted Zach Harrison from Ohio State, so maybe he'll take a big sophomore leap. But this is not a young defensive line where Atlanta can go, we like our guys. No, Terry Fontenot went the one-year veteran route for this year. And it's working out pretty well so far, I'd say, for this year. But that's it, just this year. So Montez Sweat could have fortunately been an opportunity to get them some long-term stability at the edge rusher position. Now they either have to turn to free agency and one of those guys or look to the draft, but it's definitely a big bummer. Like, that one really stings. The Falcons nearly had him. The Bears came in with a better offer, but this might be something that Terry Fontenot kind of flips the desk over and starts muttering under his breath. I nearly had the defense figured out for the rest of the season if only the Bears did not come in with a second-round draft pick. Now, before we get to the rest of today's show, support for today's Falcons Today comes in from Prize Picks. Thanks to Prize Picks, I've had the most fun watching football and winning up to 25 times my money this season. And now I can also play during basketball season as well. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. So for this week, this is what I am rolling with. Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, more than half a touchdown combined. I just need one Bijan, just one, okay? Baker Mayfield, less than 224.5 passing yards. And I also like the less on Odell Beckham Jr., 32.5 receiving yards. Testing my skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into just $250 with a few taps. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. The link for that is in the comments and the description of today's show. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Shifting gears, let's talk about Drake London and this week's upcoming matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. So a few days ago, we had Tori McElhaney tweeting out that Arthur Smith said Drake London's groin injury versus the Titans wasn't as bad as we thought. Said they'll see how the week goes with him. I think at this point, it could go either way with Drake London going up against the Vikings, where they might have his services, but they might not want to push it. Like groin injuries, soft tissue injuries, they are never ones you want to play with. If you return too soon, you could aggravate the injury, and you could be out for a lot longer. So I would not hold your breath on Drake London playing this week, but I don't think it's a 0% chance. I think the Falcons were expecting, like Arthur Smith said, a bit of a worse diagnosis, and the fact that he might be able to play this week is definitely encouraging. That's not going to be something that lingers around long term. Now, if Drake London cannot go, we're looking at these 3 guys to pick up the slack. Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith have been the next 2 best targets for Desmond Ridder, but now Taylor Heineke. Matt Collins has shown us some big plays down the field every once in a while, but just has not turned into a consistent go-to guy, right? Just 14 receptions compared to nearly 30 for Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. So this upcoming game will be a bit of a fun game because you not only have Taylor Heineke making his first start as an Atlanta Falcon, but you also have Jaren Hall making his first start as a Minnesota Viking. So 2 brand new starting quarterbacks for their respective teams, and it ultimately will probably come down to better coaching, defense, and who makes a big play, right? Who blocks a field goal? Who blocks a punt? Which punter pins their opponent down to the 1 yard line? Which running back turns a simple screen into a 60-yard touchdown, right? Who's going to overcome what's going to be a difficult week for both teams in preparation by making that one big play at some point in the game? Now, I don't want to say this is a must-win game for Atlanta because they've got a relatively easy schedule. Like, technically, the easiest schedule in terms of strength of schedule moving forward. They've got the Vikings this week at home without Kirk Cousins. Then they go to the Cardinals, who are 1-7, but that very well may be Kyler Murray's first game back. Then they go on a bye, and they return to play the Saints at 4-4. New Orleans looks like a bit of a disaster right now. The Jets have quietly stacked up 3 straight wins, so I don't think that's going to be a gimme. But you look at the Falcons' upcoming schedule, like just I think one team above 500 the rest of the way. They may very well sleepwalk their way to 9 wins and an NFC South championship. Before we get out of here, we do have to talk about the biggest news, I would say, regarding this team, and that is maybe the greatest concession item known to man. The Falcons, along with Atlanta United, are debuting this rib-filled mac and cheese on a bed of potato chips. Producer Coop had not seen this before. His eyes just opened wide open. So, little baby back ribs, like circle standing up. I don't know how else you call that. Standing ribs with mac and cheese in the middle. Now, they only have 50 of them available per game. So, make sure if you're going to the game to check them out, get there early, get there often. And then please, if you do get them, I have to know how they are. Let me know in the comment section. This looks like maybe the best concession item I've ever actually seen before. So let's end the video with this question here, a little off topic, but what is the most underrated stadium concession? Coop, you want to unmute yourself and come in with maybe not like your basic one, a hot dog or a pretzel, but which one that if you see, you're like, I got to stop and get this?
I think a turkey leg.
Turkey leg, that's a commitment. May I counter with a churro? Great dessert. Great dessert. Great ballpark dessert. That's going to do it for us on today's show, though. Appreciate everyone for tuning in and making us a part of your day. We'll sign off and see you all later.